Alright, good afternoon and welcome back to class. The second session this week, rhyme and sound patterning. So this unit deals with rhyme and sound patterning. This unit and the next have to do with the elements that you create, with the poetic elements, the linguistic elements that you create musicality, aesthetics, and memorability in a poem or a text. Elements that make a text or a poem more memorable, more pleasant sounding, more aesthetic, and more beautiful. Rhyme and sound patterning. In this unit, we are interested, remember, in sounds, not spelling, in the phonetic structure of words rather than their spelling. So I say this at the beginning to remember this. Because of the relatively small number of distinct sounds used in a language, the sounds of a text inevitably occur and recur as we read and make up a kaleidoscope of repetitions and permutations. So each language has a selection of sounds, a range of sounds, a selection of sounds, usually ranging between 30 to 50 sounds. So most languages have a selection of 40 sounds. Some have more, some have less. English, for example, has 44 sounds. British English, not American English. American English has more sounds. Talking about British English, the BBC English, if you like, Queen English, RP English. Arabic, Classical Arabic, Quranic Arabic, Standard Arabic has 36 sounds. So each language has a selection of sounds. Human beings can make about 200 sounds. In other words, all the sounds found in the languages of the world, about 7,000 languages at present count, all the sounds are about 200 sounds. So languages selected from these sounds, and as you can imagine, many of these sounds are repeated in the languages of the world. In Arabic, for example, we have bah, there is bah in English, there is bah in Malay, etc., etc. So the human vocal tract can make about 200 sounds, but no language, no single language, or no human being can make all these sounds. The human vocal tract is capable of making about 200 sounds, but the sounds we can make are the sounds that we acquire in infancy, acquire as children. In other words, the sounds that we know are the sounds of our mother tongue, or in the case of a bilingual or a trilingual, then the sounds of the languages he or she was exposed to at a young age. And so a bilingual will have more sounds than a monolingual. Someone being brought up as Malay and as a French, the mother speaks, let's say, French and the father Malay, then would have more sounds than a monolingual, either French or Malay. This is not our issue. The thing is that each language has a selection, 40 sounds, more or less, and these sounds are being repeated in the words that we make, in the conversations we make, in the texts we produce. And so in casual conversation, and most kinds of written texts, this repetition of sounds occurs for the most part apparently randomly as we communicate, ordered only by the historical accidents governing which sounds make up which words. But this is in casual conversation and communication. But we can also sometimes deliberately pattern sounds in a systematic way. And so we can organize the sounds of utterances in more systematic ways, like what writers and especially poets do. Songwriters, poets, some political speakers, politicians making political speeches that can be highly memorable, musical. So a degree of sound patterning is there. So we can manipulate creatively the sounds in a way that would create more musicality and so memorability, apart from casual speech. Let's look at the structure now of the syllable. In Unit 17, next week, we will see that the metrical form of a poem, the stressed and unstressed syllables, the strong and weak beats that create rhythm and musicality, like di-da, 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 or di-di-di-da, di-di-di-da, the musicality created by the kind of metrical foot used. We know about metrical feet and the different metrical forms of poems in English next week. But we'll see that the metrical form of a poem involves control over the syllables of the line. And the syllables are also relevant for the organization of sound patterning. So the metrical form used in a poem to create musicality and memorability depends on the manipulation of syllables. And this patterning or manipulation of syllables is relevant to the organization of sound patterning we're talking about. Now there are two kinds, basic kinds of sound patterning. How we can arrange sounds, select words carefully that create, as I said, musicality by way of arranging sounds and words that have the same sounds nearby in neighboring environments. There are two basic kinds of sound patterning. These are rhyme and alliteration. So rhyme can create sound patterning and so effects, aesthetic effects in a poem, and alliteration. Let's look at these two types. But before we look at these two types of sound patterning, we need to define the syllable, since both involve different parts of the syllable. So what is syllable? Now this may seem like we're taking a course in phonetics and phonology, a course in the phonology of English or phonetics in general. The question now is, what is the syllable? So I'm going to define the syllable before we can proceed to the types or the two basic kinds of sound patterning. Just give me a second, please. All right. All right, to begin with, words are composed of syllables in English and many other languages. Chinese is monosyllabic, only one syllable in each word. So that's why you find someone called in Chinese. One of my students, for example, is called, what is her name? Let me see if I can see her name. Yeah, Si Ying. Sorry, Su Ying. Words are composed of one or more syllables. Each word contains one or more syllables. Book, for example, has one syllable. Before has two syllables, be and for. Cinema has how many syllables? Fatihatu, cinema. Cinema has three syllables. Si, na, ma. Education has four syllables. Ad, you, ke, shin. What about communication? How many syllables? Let's count them quickly. Kam, you, ni, ke, shin. 5 syllables. What about onomatopoeic? Onomatopoeic. Shall I write it in the rhyme, in the chat? Ona, ma. What about this word in the chat? Onomatopoeic. How many syllables are there? Philia, how many syllables can you count in onomatopoeic? How many?
6.
6 syllables, exactly. O, na, ma, ta, pi, yek. 6 syllables. And so, words are made up of syllables. Some are monosyllabic, like car, door, man, 1 syllable. And some are bisyllabic, 2 syllables, before, hotel, lovely. Some are trisyllabic and some are polysyllabic, many syllables, as in the case of onomatopoeic or anti-disestablishmentarianism or ABCdarian or pneumono ultramicroscopic silico-volcanoconiosis. So some words can be polysyllabic, having many syllables. All right. How do we define a syllable? Now that we know that words are composed of small units known as syllables. Chinese, remember, is monosyllabic. All Chinese words are made up of only 1 syllable. Every Chinese word is made up of 1 syllable. Si, song, hong, keng, kang, ku, leng, leng, don, da. 1 syllable in each word. A syllable is a phonological unit. Phonological sound. A syllable is a phonological unit composed of 1 or more phonemes, sounds. Could be 1 sound, could be more than 1 sound. Technically, we call the sounds phonemes. The sound contrasts that make up a language. The selection of sounds we talked about at the beginning, that each language makes a selection of sounds. About 30 to 40. So, A syllable is a phonological unit composed of one or more phonemes, sounds. If you look at onomatopoeic, let me divide onomatopoeic into the 6 syllables. I'll write each syllable and separate it with a dot. Okay, I have divided the syllables using a dot. How many syllables? O, na, ma, ta, pi, yek. I have used dots for the division of the syllables. As you can see, some syllables are made up of only one sound, as in the first syllable, O. And some are made up of more than one sound, as in the case of the other example syllables. In the chat, I am writing. A syllable is divided into 3 parts. Now we're getting a bit technical. Now that we know that words are made up of syllables, and that a syllable is a phonological unit made up of sounds, and that a syllable can be made up of one sound or more than one sound, now we should understand that a syllable is divided into 3 parts. Every syllable has 3 parts, or can be made up of 3 parts. Every syllable has a nucleus, which is usually a vowel, but which may be a syllabic consonant, as I shall discuss later today. So every vowel must have a nucleus. This is a must. A nucleus, which is usually a vowel, but it can also be a consonant, a syllabic consonant. I will explain this in a minute, or in a few minutes. And the other parts are the onset and the coda. So every syllable has a nucleus, which must be a vowel. Now the nucleus, the vowel, may be preceded and or followed by one or more sounds, phonemes. The nucleus may be preceded by one or more sounds, or followed by one or more sounds. The ones that come before are known as the onset. The ones that follow the nucleus are known as the coda, closing, coda. And so a syllable has a hierarchical structure. First, it is the nucleus, then you could have an onset, and you could have a coda, or both an onset and a coda. And so what is a must is the nucleus. There can be a coda without an onset, or an onset without a coda, or no onset and no coda, or both onset and coda. Excuse me. To look at the word onomatopoeic in the chat again, to exemplify this. So if you look at the word onomatopoeic, the syllables in onomatopoeic, the first syllable is O. This syllable is made up of only one part, the nucleus, which is the must, and which is a vowel. So O is alone and a syllable, a phonological unit. The next syllable is made up of the nucleus O and an onset, na, no. Fatihatul. The next, explain the next. The ma, onama. What's the structure of the syllable? It's made up of a nucleus and an onset. Okay, Anisa, the next syllable. Onamata, ta. Analyze the structure of the syllable. I cannot hear you.
Nucleus and onset.
Nurul, Aida, can you tell me the structure of this syllable? Speak loud. Okay, it's made up of the nucleus O and an onset, the onset T. The next is made up of the nucleus E. On a meta P, we go with the sound, not the spelling. So though it is written OE, but when we pronounce it, it's E, as in the word C, which can be spelled as either double E or EA, but it's still E. Or the sound E in believe, which is IE, or the sound E in conceive, which is EI, or the sound E in amoeba, which is OE. And so we do not go by the spelling. When we talk about sound, we go with the sound. So here we have the vowel E, the nucleus E, and it is preceded by the onset P. The last vowel, ik, we have the nucleus I and the coda C. And so as you can see, some syllables can be made up of only one component, and that is the nucleus. Some can have the onset and the coda. Some can have only the onset or the coda, or even both. Okay, so far so good. Okay, I would like to add one more thing about the syllable before we move on. I have said that the nucleus is largely a vowel, is mostly a vowel, as in all these instances in onomatopoeic. But sometimes the nucleus, the heart of a syllable, can also be a consonant, but not any consonant. What we call a syllabic consonant. Let me write this term in the chat. Syllabic consonant. What's a syllabic consonant? The nucleus of the syllable is usually a vowel, but it can also be a syllabic consonant, a consonant sound, syllabic consonant. It is called syllabic, by the way, because it can act as a syllable. Syllabic consonant, because the consonant sound can act or create a syllable. Hence syllabic consonant, because vowels make the syllables. We've said that a syllable without a nucleus cannot be a syllable. There must be a nucleus, which is a vowel or a syllabic consonant. In onomatopoeic, O is a vowel, hence it is a syllable. A syllabic consonant, there are two types of syllabic consonants: nasals and liquids. Nasals and liquids. What's a nasal? Nasals are sounds such as meh and nah, which are produced via the nasal cavity, not the oral cavity. Say meh or say nah. Meh, meh. You see the air coming out of your nose. Meh, meh. The tongue is raised up, closes the oral cavity, and so the air is being released through the nose. These are known as nasal sounds. So, nasal consonants can act as syllabic consonants, and so they can act as syllables. For example, look at the Look at this word. I will write in the chat. Or before that, does anyone know the capital of Swaziland? Swaziland is a country in Africa. Swaziland. Have you heard of Swaziland? If you haven't, then you wouldn't know its capital. Okay, I write the capital of Swaziland in the chat. This is the capital of Swaziland. Can anyone pronounce it? Try to pronounce it. Or can anyone try to break down the capital of Swaziland into its syllables? How many syllables are in the word in this word? How many syllables? Quickly, guys.
4.
4. What are they?
Ba, ni.
You're right. They are 4. So the first syllable is M or M. So mbabani or ambabani. So the first syllable, which is made up, which is the sound M is not a vowel. It is a consonant, but it is acting as a vowel here. Ambabani, or mbabani, mbabani, mbabani. So this is known as a syllabic consonant. It's a nasal. So nasal sounds m and n can act as syllables in certain environments, in environments like this. The other syllabic consonant, the other category that can act also as a syllable is that of liquids. Liquids are sounds such as ra and la. Ra and la. These two sounds, in their manner of articulation, when we articulate them, when we say ra and la, what happens to the air flow? Ra. The air flow, let me read the definition of liquids in the dictionary to save time. As a category of sounds. Okay. Liquid is a consonant produced by allowing the air stream to flow over the sides of the tongue, typically la and ra. So the air stream flows over the sides of the tongue, as you say la, ra. The air moves or it flows through the sides of or over the sides of the tongue. Liquids also can act as syllabic consonants. Look at, for example, the word bottle. Bottle. How many syllables are in bottle? And what are they? We have 2 syllables, bot, and the second one is the l. So bottle, bottle, bottle. And so the second syllable is made up, forget about the E at the end, because the E is not sounded. The E is not sounded. And so the second syllable is made up of a syllabic consonant, not a vowel. Okay, so this is all about the structure of the syllable. I have defined the syllable and the structure of the syllable. It's important to understand the syllable before talking about types of sound pattern, which we're going to discuss now, the 2 basic types, rhyme and alliteration. And before we talk about the various poetic forms, the meters, metrical feet we're going to discuss next week in the next unit about verse, rhyme, and rhythm. So now let's move on and talk about the types of sound pattern, rhyme, and alliteration. Are you with me? Sound patterning can be achieved in two ways: rhyme and alliteration. We can group the various kinds of sound patterning into larger groups, which we can call types of rhyme and types of alliteration. Types of rhyme involve the end of the syllable, while types of alliteration involve the beginning of the syllable. So one major difference between these two types of sound patterning is that rhyming has to do with the end of the syllable, having the same sound at the end. Alliteration having the same sound at the beginning of a word or syllable. Okay, so this is one thing. Now let's talk about rhyme. Strict rhyme involves the nucleus plus coda. The nucleus, the vowel or the syllabic consonant, plus the coda, the sound or sounds, the phoneme or phonemes at the end, after. For example, thus bite, plight, and fight could all rhyme. We have the same nucleus, I, and we have the same coda, ta, ta, ta. So this is perfect rhyme. So when we have the same nucleus, in this case I, not oh, not I, not u, the same when we have the same nucleus and the same coda, then that's the best type of rhyme. Bite, fight, light, height, white, sight, diet, because they have the same nucleus and coda. Where just the nucleus is repeated and the coda varies, this is assonance. What is assonance? Assonance involves the repetition of just the nucleus, the vowel, but not the coda. For example, do we have an example here? The same nucleus, assonance is same nucleus but different coda. For example, I and bite. So in I and bite, we have the same vowel, or rather the same nucleus, I, but not the same coda. There is no coda in I bite. So this creates some musicality because the I is repeated, I bite. But this is not strict rhyme. So when we have the same nucleus, the same vowel, this creates assonance. We call this assonance. For example, as in the repetition of oh in the following words: hot, song, rod. Oh, oh, oh. So that's assonance. The same nucleus being repeated in nearby words, but different codas. Song, wrong, hong. Wait a minute. No, but this is the same coda also. Song, hong, wrong. This is perfect rhyme because you have the same nucleus and the same coda. We have Consonants. What is consonants? Consonants is the same coda, different in nucleus. The other way around. In assonance, it's the same in nucleus, different coda. As in I and we've said bite. In consonants, we have the same coda at the end, but different in nucleus. For example, though at does not rhyme with bite because the nucleus is different. Bite, at. So we have the same coda, the tah sound, at and bite. At and bite. The same coda, but different in nucleus. This is known as consonants. Let me repeat this for the last time. Same nucleus, same coda, that's perfect rhyme. Same nucleus, different coda, that's assonance. Same coda, different in nucleus, that's consonants. Alright? Hail to thee, blithe spirit, bear thou never word that from heaven or near it pour us thy full heart in profuse strains of unpremeditated art. Higher still and higher from the earth thou springest, like a cloud of fire, the blue deep thou wingest, and singing still dost soar, and soaring ever singest. In the first stanza, there is an exact repetition in heart and art. So, now let's see the types of rhyme. Heart and art. Look at the rhyme scheme. Which is a rhyme, because the same nucleus and the same coda, heart, art. The question is word part of the same rhyme? This word? One question we might ask is whether Shelley pronounced this word as he pronounced heart. Language change, language variation. Did the poet about 200 years ago pronounce word the same way he pronounced heart, so that it can rhyme with heart and art, just as in spirit, near it, spirit, near it, and near it? Vowels have changed in the course of history of English. We know that. We talked about the great vowel shift, for example. And a pair of words might once have rhymed even if they do not rhyme now. So it's possible that word was pronounced as what at the time of the writing of this poem. However, a check of a contemporary edition of Walker's pronouncing dictionary shows that word and heart are listed at that time as having different pronunciations, at least in one standard accent of English. If he did not pronounce these words alike, then we could describe this as an example of consonance with heart. Consonance. Why consonance? Because we have the same coda, the ta, but different in nucleus, not the same in nucleus. So this is not rhyme, it's consonance. Heart and art, rhyme. Word, if word was pronounced as word, then word is consonance, because the coda is different. The nucleus is different. Not R. So this is an example of consonants. Consonants, as we've said, is the repetition of just coda. Here the final consonant or the R if the R is pronounced as it is in some accents, like British English, you know, pronouncing the R or dropping the R, the post-vocalic R. Where are we? It is often the case that a consonant is upgraded to count as a rhyme. Can you see this sentence? The last third line from the bottom, page 197. So we might consider consonants sometimes, as in the case of word, when it comes to heart and art, it might be upgraded to count as rhyme. Hail to thee, like the spirit. Birth thou never wert that form heaven or near it. Pour us thy full heart is in profuse strains of unpremeditated art. If there is supported evidence, then we might consider it as also rhyme. If we look at the rest of the poem, including the second stanza quoted here, we find that the second springest, and fourth wingest, and fifth lines singest characteristically rhyme with each other, and this gives us some reason to think of the word heart match as a slightly defective rhyme rather than a true consonance. Rather than a true consonance. And so because we have in the second stanza 3 lines made up of the same sound, springest, wingest, and singest, so word might be rhyme to rhyme with heart and art. So three words, just like the other 3 words in the second stanza. So it is. We might think of it then as rhyme, but it's a defective rhyme because it involves a different nucleus. So in other words, the writer meant it to be as a rhyme rather than a consonant. I hope you can follow me. I cannot make it simpler, guys. Okay, let's now move on and distinguish between 2 types of rhyme, masculine and feminine rhyme. Masculine versus feminine rhyme. This kind of rhyme, okay, feminine rhyme involves a word that is made up of 2 syllables. The first syllable is stressed and the second is unstressed. That's a feminine rhyme. If we look at the poem, hail to thee, blithe spirit. Spirit, for example, and in the third line, near it. So, spirit, 2 syllables. Spirit. Near it, 2 syllables. Near it. The first syllable is stressed. Spirit. Excuse me. Hello, guys. There is something also to be added to the concept of the syllable I haven't talked about. Because the writers did not mention it here. But we've already said that words are made up of syllables. 1 syllable, 2 syllables, more or less. Now there is another piece of information you should know. In the case of words that are composed of more than 1 syllable, meaning 2 and above. One of these syllables must be stressed. One syllable, no problem. Ka, to, ma, they are said to be stressed anyhow, naturally. But in the case of 2-syllabic, bisyllabic words or more, one syllable is stressed. For example, in the case of, for example, before, it is a second syllable. Before. By stress, I mean you hear the sound, you make the sound, if you are the speaker, to be louder. I don't want to get into the details of the stress now, to talk about the physical correlates of the stress: duration, prominence, pitch, loudness. I don't want to get into this, but simply the stress syllable sounds or seems or is rather louder, higher and longer when you compare it with the other neighboring sounds, syllables I mean. And so before, you hear fo more than b. In the case of hotel, hotel, the second syllable stressed. In the case of China, first syllable, China. Japan, second syllable, Japan. Lovely, first syllable. It is lovely, not lovely. Develop, the second syllable, develop, not develop, not develop, not develop, sorry, develop, the syllable, it is a second, develop. Communication, the stress syllable is mu, communication, communication. And also the last syllable is also stressed, but secondary stress, because in longer words there are two stresses, a primary one and a secondary one. So in communication, the loudest syllable is mu, communication, communication. This is in English. In English, English is a, see, I get into details I don't want to get into. English is a let me not get into this. One of the syllables must be stressed in the case of English. To know that, you need to hear the word from a native speaker or someone whose English you trust, or the dictionary, to know where the stressed syllable is. You make mistakes, guys, when it comes to stress in some words. For example, most of you Malays say faculty, stressing the second syllable, which is wrong. It is faculty. You say specific, stressing the first syllable, which is wrong. The second syllable should be stressed. Specific, specific, for example. And so the stress is an issue in pronunciation, especially in English, not in some other languages. The issue with stress is not there in French, because French, no syllable receives a greater stress than the other. All syllables are have the same level of stress. They are pronounced in the same manner, not some weak and one is strong. So the word communication in English would sound in French as communication. English, communication, communication, communication. In French, communication, communication. All the syllables have the same type of loudness. But that's another language. Coming back to the issue of stress and syllables, where was I? Hail to thee, blithe spirit. I was talking about the feminine rhyme and masculine rhyme. Feminine rhyme involves words that are made up of two syllables. The first syllable is stressed, as in spirit, and the second is unstressed, spirit, near it. Okay, so that's feminine rhyme. Masculine rhyme, in masculine rhyme, the last syllable is stressed. For example, let's imagine a line of verse ending with song. So song is stressed. Spirit, the last syllable is unstressed. For example, delight. Delight. Light, masculine, because the last syllable is stressed. Unstressed, stressed. Delight. But spirit, this is the opposite. Unstressed, stressed. We're going to mention unstressed, stressed a lot next week when we talk about the meters. Or strong, weak, weak, strong, 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 weak, 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 strong. Or stressed, stressed, unstressed. So we're going to talk about, so it is important that you watch this video again. I am recording the class before next week to understand, because I'm going to build on this discussion next week. I'm not going to talk about the syllable again. But you cannot understand the meter and the poetic forms without understanding the syllable. Next, let's move on now and talk about the second type of sound patterning, and that is alliteration. Alliteration. We've said that rhyme has to do with the last sound. The end involves the end of the syllable, while alliteration involves the beginning of the syllable or word. The second major class, this is the second paragraph on page 198. The second major class of sound patterning is alliteration, which in its prototypical form involves repetition of the onset, as in paste and pay. Remember the onset. The onset can be one sound or more than one sound. So in paste, it's one sound, the pa. And then we have the nucleus, A, and then the coda, which is made up of STE, and pay, or a plaster and applied. The ideal type of alliteration is the one that involves the repetition of the onset. The onset, as in these examples, paste and pay, or plaster and apply. So the repetition of PL, PL, plied, plaster. But for the most part in English, we can also say that there is alliteration if just the first consonant, the first sound in the onset is repeated. So the strict type, the beta type, will be repetition of the onset, the group of sounds that come before the nucleus. But we can consider, class, we can also consider as alliteration the repetition of the sound, meaning if only the first sound is repeated, this can also count as alliteration. For example, this is the kind of alliteration we see in Shelley's poem, porous, profuse. See, look at porous and profuse. Look at the onset. In porous, okay, the nucleus is O, and the onset is pa. Look at the next one, profuse. The nucleus is the schwa, but the onset is made up of two sounds, pa and ra. Not only pa as in porous. So, but we still count it as alliteration. It would be more musical if it's the same onset As in, for example, the previous example, Blythe, sorry, plaster and plight. The PL repeated the whole onset, not just the first sound. But anyhow, this can still be counted as alliteration. Remember that in analyzing alliteration, it is particularly important to remember that you are analyzing sounds, not letters again. I have made this caveat at the beginning. Let's now move on to the significance of sound patterns. It's raining here, and I have to shout because I feel like you cannot hear me. It's raining here and deafening. Significance of sound patterns. Now that we have talked about sound patterning, what makes sound patterns, and functions of sound patterning, there are 5 functions of arranging sounds in a way that would make words rhyme and alliterate. Assonate, assonance, assonate, and consonate, consonants. Assonate, consonate, alliterate, and rhyme. There are 5 functions. Meaning, why do poets strive to have sound patterning? There are 5 functions, 5 reasons. The first one, I will write them here briefly and then we discuss them, is musicality. Musicality. You may want to add to it also memorability. Musicality and memorability, to make it more musical and more memorable. Musicality and memorability. Another function of sound patterning is cohesiveness. A third function is foregrounding. A fourth function is parallelism, creating parallelism. And the fifth function is sound symbolism. Sound patterning may create sound symbolism, and so sound symbolism. Let's quickly talk about these 5 functions. I mean, it's obvious that sound patterning is done to create, some aesthetic, some musicality, repeating the same sounds, whether through rhyming or alliteration, consonants or assonance, can create a musicality. Another function of sound patterns is cohesiveness. Patterning may serve as a cohesive function. If you remember in the courses I taught you previously, we talked about cohesion and cohesive devices. The kinds of devices, discourse markers and other devices, conjunctions, pronouns, referencing, etc., that can create cohesion or connectedness, a sense of sticking or connectedness within the various elements in a text. Now, patterning sounds can act or may serve as a cohesive function, bonding words together as formulaic fixed phrases or units. At the sound level, repeating the same sounds may create some cohesiveness, cohesion. Next, a third function, or another type of significance of sound patterns is foregrounding. Patterning may have the effect of emphasizing or foregrounding some aspect of the text. When you use sound patterning, it's like you are highlighting, like you are emphasizing certain words, ideas, and so sound patterning may help foreground or emphasize some aspects of the text. All right. This is the reason why maybe we use I mean, this can also sometimes the physical existence of the utterance as a linguistic construct is emphasized, as in the case of tongue twisters, such as the alliterative Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppercorns, or she sells seashells on the seashore. Okay, the fourth function of sound patterning is parallelism. It can create or may have the effect of creating or reinforcing a parallelism. This similarity of sound. Remember, parallelism having the same structure, the same sound, the same effect. In this case, words that are linked together on the basis of shared sounds will also be linked in terms of their meanings. The final function of sound patterning is that it may create sound symbolism. It may create sound symbolism. Sound symbolism, that is the idea that sounds may be expressive sometimes or may have expressive effects. I don't want to get into the argument. I don't want to get into the argument that the words are made up of arbitrary. Excuse me. Give me a second. Give me a second. Give me a second. Okay. That words are made up of arbitrary sounds. Tree in English, shajara in Arabic, arbor in French, and I don't know which word in Malay. But there are still views, or there is still another view that says that sounds have or can be meaningful on their own. They might be suggestive of certain meanings. For example, the words sneeze, snore, snooze, and sniffle, the SN, the SN, sneeze, snore, snooze, sniffle, are all to do with breathing through the nose, and might be considered to sound like the actions they refer to. Or look at the other example, clatter, clang, and clash. Also just one thing, striking against another. Or words beginning with SP, as in splash, sputter, spill, all involve liquid. So there is a view, in addition to the dominant view, that the dominant linguistic view that the sounds of language are arbitrary, there is also another view that sounds in language may have symbolic meanings or expressive effects. If that's true, or if this may be true, this has to be investigated further. Then playing or manipulating sounds may have may have or contribute or express symbolic meanings. As for example, in the well-known line from Tennyson, the murmuring of innumerable bees, the murmuring of innumerable bees. So the repeated mah sounds are taken to represent the sound of bees. The murmuring of the innumerable, or the murmuring of innumerable bees. So the repetition of the mah is taken to represent the sound made by bees. And so here, the manipulation of sounds, the patterning of sounds, can be said to contribute symbolically to the meaning. So that can be, and this will lead us now to the final section, making interpretations on the basis of sound patterns. Sound patterning is done largely for aesthetic. Remember, we've just said that sound patterning may be done or may have the function of sound symbolism, like expressive effects. But remember that largely sound patterning is done for aesthetic rather than expressive effects. And so, even if you believe that sounds may have or contribute symbolically to meaning, this has to be taken within the context. The context and meanings of words that appear to create local expressive effects should therefore take priority. Only after considering these is it safe to suggest ways in which the sound might support or perhaps undercut the sense. And so caution is therefore needed in putting forward interpretive arguments based on the connotations or symbolic qualities of sound. When we talk about making interpretations on the basis of sound, interpretations, meanings based on the basis of sounds, sound symbolism. We have to be careful because this is not established. On the contrary, the dominant view in linguistics is that the sounds of language are arbitrary. We call it in Arabic, or in English we call it horse, the hay eating animal. In English, horse. In Arabic, hisan. In Chinese, ma. In I don't know which language, kabalo. And I think in Turkish. So what do you call a horse in Malay? What is horse? You don't know? It's alright, no problem. Whichever word, it will be a different word. It will not be horse or ma or hisan. It will be a different word. And if we ask the Tamil guys here, what is horse in... And so this refers to the arbitrary combination of sounds. We just happen to call it horse in English. In Arabic, we happen to call it hisan. And so if words were not arbitrary, then the same object would be called the same. In all languages, it would have the same sound. So the dominant view is that of the arbitrariness of, human languages and the sounds of language. And so we have to be careful, when we want to interpret or make interpretations based on the arrangement of sounds. So unless we prove an effect of sound patterning, unless we have an evidence, then we should not get into this. Um, Earlier in this unit, we named various types of sound pattern that can emerge in a text. These labels are useful if they help us to describe sound patterning, like rhyme, alliteration, assonance, consonance. But in the actual analysis of texts, it often seems that there are no clear-cut boundaries between sound effects. Rhyme, assonance, and consonance are mixed together not as a repertoire of separate devices, but in a texture of complex and interconnected patterning. So it's easy to talk about them separately, but in reality, when we analyze a poem, all these elements of sound patterning or devices of sound patterning are interconnected. And so, in attempting to interpret sound patterns, it is useful to distinguish between fairly systematic and predictable patterns that serve to define a form, such as rhyme, scheme, and local kinds of ornamentation. This is easy. The rhyme scheme, for example, ABBA, CD, etc., etc. And we should distinguish between the fairly easy way to talk about sound patterns and patterns that have locally marked effects and seem to have expressive or symbolic functions, such as extra memorability or special suggestiveness. That's all about this interesting, though technical unit. I think we can end this meeting unless you have a question. So this is rhyme and sound patterning. This unit will pave the way to unit 17 next week, verse, meter, and rhythm. So make sure that you revise this unit before you prepare for the next meeting. And until the next meeting, I wish you all the best. Okay, guys? See you.
Tidak ada.
Thank you, doctor.